The Empire stretched across 17 star systems, its golden fleets cutting through the void like knives through silk. For 3,000 years, they had ruled the galaxy's eastern spiral arm without question, without challenge, without even the faintest whisper of rebellion. They were perfect beings, tall, graceful, with skin that shimmered like polished metal and minds that could process information at speeds that made quantum computers seem sluggish. High Admiral stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Eternal Dominion, watching the display the latest conquest. Another primitive world had fallen before their might, its population now kneeling in submission. The planet's crude spacecraft had been swept aside like insects before a hurricane. Their weapons had been laughably primitive, chemical rockets and metal projectiles that barely scratched the hulls of vessels. "Another world cleansed of its ignorance," announced Captain, her voice carrying the musical quality all possessed. Their technology was even more primitive than expected. They were still using fossil fuels for energy. Nodded with satisfaction. They had long ago transcended such crude methods. Their ships drew power from the very fabric of spacetime itself. Their weapons could shatter moons, and their minds could commune directly with their technology. They were evolution's masterpiece, the universe's chosen people. "How many casualties did we suffer?" asked, though he already knew the answer. "None, High Admiral, as always." His laugh was like silver bells. "These lesser beings never learn. They see our ships and think they can fight us with their primitive weapons. It would be amusing if it weren't so pathetic." The High Admiral walked to the massive windows that dominated the bridge's forward section. Beyond the transparent aluminum, space glittered with the lights of his fleet, 1,200 vessels of various classes, each one a work of art that could level continents. They didn't just build weapons, they crafted instruments of divine judgment. "Set course for the next system on our expansion list," he commanded. "The one the scouts designated as System 847 Alpha." The navigation officer's hands danced over holographic controls that responded to both touch and thought. "Course plotted, High Admiral. The system contains one inhabited world orbiting a yellow star. Primitive radio communications detected." "Excellent, another quick conquest to add to our glory." What none of them knew was that System 847 Alpha had another name, a name its inhabitants called it with pride and fierce determination. They called it Sol, and the third planet was called Earth. 2 weeks later, the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system. Immediately, their sensors began cataloging what they found: a star system with several rocky planets, gas giants, and asteroid belts. Nothing unusual. What caught their attention was the electromagnetic chatter coming from the third planet. "Fascinating," murmured Science Officer as she studied the readings. "Their technology appears to be advancing rapidly. We're detecting nuclear signatures, primitive spacecraft, and complex communication networks." Examined the data flowing across his command display. "Nuclear weapons? How quaint. They've barely learned to split atoms and they're already trying to destroy themselves." He gestured dismissively. "Standard procedure. Send a warning transmission demanding their immediate surrender, then prepare for orbital bombardment." The communications array hummed to life, broadcasting a message in 17 different languages that they had acquired from their conquered worlds. The message was simple and had never failed to produce the desired result: submit or be destroyed. On Earth, the transmission was received simultaneously by every major government, military installation, and research facility. Within hours, emergency sessions were called in capitals around the world. The message was clear, terrifying, and left no room for misinterpretation. "People of this system," the transmission began in perfect English, Mandarin, Russian, and other languages, "you are in the presence of the Empire, rulers of 17 star systems, and masters of this galaxy. We offer you one opportunity to preserve your primitive existence. Surrender unconditionally. Disarm your military forces. Submit to our rule. You have 72 hours to comply. Failure to do so will result in the complete cleansing of your world." President Sarah sat in the Situation Room beneath the White House, surrounded by military advisors, scientists, and world leaders connected via secure channels. The room buzzed with frantic activity as everyone tried to process what they were facing. "How many ships?" asked General, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Director of NASA's Deep Space Monitoring Program, looked up from her tablet with a pale face. "Our telescopes count at least 1,200 vessels of various sizes. The largest ones are? They're massive, bigger than aircraft carriers. And General, they just appeared. No approach trajectory, no acceleration burns. They just materialized at the edge of our system. Recommendations. President's voice was steady despite the magnitude of the crisis. General leaned forward. Madam President, we need to assume these beings are hostile. Their message makes that clear. I recommend we immediately implement the unified defense protocols we developed after the first SETI signals. Doctor shook her head. With respect, General, our weapons are designed to fight each other, not aliens with technology centuries or ahead of ours. If they can travel between stars and appear out of nowhere, what chance do our missiles have? Then what do you suggest, Doctor? That we just roll over and surrender? President raised her hand for silence. We respond as humanity always has when faced with impossible odds. We adapt, we fight, and we never give up. Doctor, how long do we have? 72 hours until their deadline. But Madam President, their fleet isn't moving. They're holding position at the edge of the solar system, almost like they're waiting. Waiting for what? Maybe they're curious about our response, or maybe they're just confident that we'll surrender. General's jaw tightened. Then they don't know humanity very well. Meanwhile, aboard the Eternal Dominion, High Admiral was indeed curious about the humans' response. Unlike the other species they had conquered, these creatures weren't immediately broadcasting surrender messages or scrambling to disable their weapons. Instead, their electromagnetic chatter had increased dramatically. What are they doing? He asked Science Officer. They appear to be coordinating, High Admiral. We're detecting massive increases in communications between their various population centers. Their military forces are moving into defensive positions, and they're launching additional spacecraft. Captain laughed. More ships. Have they seen the size of our fleet? Actually, continued studying her readings, their spacecraft are quite remarkable for such a primitive species. They're crude, but they show innovative engineering. Some of them appear to be armed with nuclear weapons. Waved dismissively. Nuclear weapons? How adorable. Our shields can withstand the collapse of small stars. Their atomic toys will be less effective than throwing rocks. What he didn't know was that humanity's response to the alien threat wasn't just military. It was industrial, scientific, and utterly unprecedented in their history. Every major power on Earth had immediately put aside their differences and begun working together with a unity that had never before been achieved. Factories that had been producing consumer goods were retooled overnight to manufacture weapons and spacecraft. Every nuclear weapon on the planet was being fitted with new delivery systems. Scientists were working around the clock to analyze the alien transmissions and develop countermeasures. More importantly, humanity was doing what it had always done best, adapting and innovating under pressure. In underground facilities around the world, teams of engineers were stripping down every piece of advanced technology they had and rebuilding it with one goal in mind: hurt the aliens as much as possible before going down. The International Space Station had been evacuated, its modules repurposed as weapons platforms. Lunar mining operations that had been purely civilian were being converted into missile bases. Dr. James Wu, head of the Combined Earth Defense Initiative, stood before a massive holographic display showing Earth's hastily assembled defenses. Ladies and, we have 60 hours remaining. Our analysis of their transmissions suggests they're using some form of faster-than-light communication, which means their technology is definitely superior to ours. However, we've identified several potential advantages. The room fell silent as military commanders from every major nation listened. First, they're overconfident. Their ultimatum suggests they expect us to surrender without a fight. Second, they're holding position at the edge of our solar system, which gives us time to prepare. Third, and most importantly, they don't know humanity. General Wei, representing the Chinese military, leaned forward. What do you mean? Every species they've conquered before has apparently surrendered quickly. They've never faced a species that fights back with everything it has. They don't know that humans would rather die fighting than live as slaves. Admiral Sarah of the Royal Navy nodded grimly. What's our plan? Dr. Wu gestured to the holographic display, which shifted to show the alien fleet's position. We can't win a conventional battle, but we don't need to. We just need to hurt them badly enough that they think twice about easy conquest. Our nuclear arsenal has been redistributed to every available launch platform. Our space assets are being converted to weapons, and we have one more thing they won't expect, which is human creativity under pressure. In the last 48 hours, our engineers have developed 17 different ways to weaponize civilian technology. Our hackers are attempting to penetrate their communications. Our physicists are analyzing their ship's energy signatures, and every human on Earth is contributing in some way. The display shifted again, showing manufacturing facilities around the globe. We're not just preparing for battle, we're evolving our entire civilization in real time. When they attack, they won't be fighting the same species that received their ultimatum. Aboard the Eternal Dominion was beginning to feel a slight unease. In all his centuries of conquest, he had never seen a species respond to their ultimatum with such frantic activity. Usually, the primitive beings either surrendered immediately or made token gestures of defiance before being crushed. "Status report," he commanded. "High Admiral," replied, her musical voice carrying a note of confusion. "The humans are behaving unusually. They're not surrendering, but they're also not fleeing. Instead, they appear to be preparing for war." "Preparing how?" "They're launching hundreds of spacecraft from their planet's surface. Their energy output has increased by 300%. They're moving military assets into orbital positions and activating every weapons system on their planet." Captain scoffed. "Let them, it will make their destruction all the more satisfying," but was studying the tactical display with growing interest. The humans weren't just preparing random defenses. They were coordinating their entire planet's resources with remarkable efficiency. In less than 2 days, they had transformed their entire civilization into a war machine. "Science officer, show me detailed scans of their spacecraft." The main filled with images of human vessels, crude by standards, but built with obvious care and intelligence. The ships were heavily armed and showed signs of rapid modification. "Interesting," mused. "They're adapting their technology in real time. Look at these designs. They're taking civilian spacecraft and turning them into weapons platforms." "Does it matter, High Admiral? Our shields can deflect anything they can produce." Was quiet for a long moment. In his 3,000 years of life, he had seen the rise and fall of dozens of species. Most had been weak, some had been clever, a few had been brave. But none had ever shown this kind of unified determination in the face of impossible odds. "Signal the fleet," he finally commanded. "Advance to the inner system. It's time to end this charade." The fleet began moving toward Earth, their massive ships cutting through space with elegant menace. They expected to find a primitive world cowering in fear, ready to beg for mercy. They had no idea they were about to encounter something that would challenge their most fundamental beliefs about their own superiority: humanity's absolute refusal to quit. As the alien armada approached, every human on Earth looked up at the stars and prepared for the fight of their species' life. They were outmatched and facing technology that seemed magical in its sophistication. But they had something they had never encountered before: the unbreakable will of a species that had clawed its way up from primitive hunters to space travelers through sheer stubborn determination. The thought they were about to conduct another routine conquest. They were wrong. The Golden Fleet that had crushed 17 civilizations was about to learn why humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through divine blessing or evolutionary perfection, but through the simple, terrifying refusal to ever give up. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and the universe would never be the same. The first human attack came from where the least expected it, behind them. High Admiral had been monitoring the pathetic defensive preparations around the third planet when his sensors screamed warnings about incoming objects from the outer system. His perfect features twisted in confusion as he watched the tactical display update with new contacts. "What am I looking at?" he demanded. Science officer's hands flew over her controls, her usual musical composure cracking. "High Admiral, we have multiple objects approaching from the asteroid belt at high velocity. They appear to be rocks." "Rocks?" "Modified asteroids, sir. They've been fitted with primitive propulsion systems and are on collision courses with our rear formations." Captain laughed, the sound like crystal chimes. "They're throwing rocks at us. How wonderfully primitive." But wasn't laughing. He was studying the tactical data, and something cold was forming in his perfect stomach. "Show me the velocity and mass calculations." The numbers appeared on his display, and for the first time in three, High Admiral felt something he had forgotten existed: concern. The asteroids weren't just rocks. Each one was the size of a city block, accelerated to significant fractions of light speed by crude but effective human rocket motors. More importantly, there were hundreds of them, and they had been positioned and launched days ago, meaning the humans had planned this attack before the fleet had even arrived. Evasive action, commanded. All ships emergency maneuvers. The golden ships of the fleet began their elegant dance through space, their advanced technology allowing them to dodge the incoming projectiles with ease. But as they moved, realized something that sent ice through his veins. This wasn't the real attack. It was a distraction. The real attack came from Earth itself. Doctor watched from the command center buried deep beneath NORAD as her carefully orchestrated plan unfolded. The asteroid bombardment had been her idea. Use humanity's industrial presence in the outer solar system to force the alien fleet into predictable evasive patterns. Now, as the graceful alien ships danced through space to avoid the crude projectiles, they were moving exactly where she wanted them. "Phase 2 is go," she announced into her headset. "All launch platforms fire at will." Around the world and throughout Earth's orbital infrastructure, humanity's last desperate gamble began. Every nuclear weapon on the planet launched simultaneously, not toward the alien fleet, but toward seemingly empty space where the aliens would be in precisely 14 minutes if they continued their current evasive patterns. The focused on the asteroid bombardment, didn't notice the much smaller nuclear missiles until it was almost too late. "New contacts," shouted, hundreds of them coming from the third planet. Watched in growing amazement as his displays filled with incoming missiles. The humans had somehow calculated his fleet's evasive maneuvers in advance and fired their weapons not at where his ships were, but where they would be. "Impossible," he whispered. "How could such primitive minds predict our movements?" What he didn't know was that humanity's greatest supercomputers, linked together in an unprecedented global network, had been running continuous calculations since the alien fleet's arrival. Every movement pattern, every ship's acceleration curve, every tactical decision had been analyzed and predicted with the relentless logic of human mathematics. The nuclear missiles reached their targets. The explosions that followed lit up space like a chain of newborn suns. The shields held against the primitive atomic weapons, just as had expected. But what he hadn't expected was the sheer number of them, or their effect on his fleet's sensors and communications. "Status report," he demanded as the bridge lights flickered. "Shields holding at 93%, but we've lost communications with 17 ships. The electromagnetic pulses from their weapons are interfering with our sensor arrays." For the first time in the Empire's history, one of their fleets was flying blind. And humanity was just getting started. In the depths of space, Commander Lisa Park floated in the cramped cockpit of a spacecraft that had been a lunar freight hauler just 5 days ago. Now it was humanity's first stealth attack craft, its hull coated with experimental materials and its engines running cold to avoid detection. She wasn't alone. Around her, invisible to both human and alien sensors, floated 200 other volunteers in similarly modified craft. They were humanity's first space commandos, and they had one job: get close enough to the alien ships to find their weaknesses. "Bravo team, this is base. You are clear to begin infiltration runs." Lisa activated her craft's whisper-quiet thrusters and began her approach toward the alien fleet. The massive ships were still reeling from the nuclear barrage, their formations disrupted and their sensors compromised. It was the perfect opportunity. As she drew closer to one of the smaller alien vessels, Lisa marveled at its beauty. The ship's hull seemed to be made of liquid gold that flowed and shifted in mesmerizing patterns. It moved through space with a grace that made human spacecraft look like flying bricks. But beautiful or not, it was still an enemy. "Base, this is Park. I'm reading energy signatures unlike anything we've seen. These ships are drawing power from I don't know what. The energy levels are off the charts." "Copy that, Park. Can you identify any weak points?" Lisa studied the alien vessel as she maneuvered her tiny craft along its hull. The ship was enormous, easily a kilometer long, but as she examined it closely, she began to notice something interesting. "Base, I think I've found something. These ships are incredibly advanced, but they're also incredibly specialized. All of their defensive systems seem designed to stop large, powerful attacks. I don't think they're built to handle small, fast targets. Explain. Look at their shield generators. They're designed to stop planet-killing weapons, not fighter-sized craft. And their hull plating. It's strong against energy weapons, but I bet it's vulnerable to physical penetration at close range. Lisa's observation was brilliant in its simplicity. They had spent centuries perfecting their defenses against other advanced civilizations. Their shields could stop antimatter warheads, and their armor could deflect energy beams that could boil seas. But they had never encountered an enemy that would try to physically ram their ships with small craft. All teams, this is base. Implement Plan Charlie, get in close and find entry points. What followed was the strangest dogfight in galactic history. 200 tiny human craft swarmed around the massive alien ships like angry wasps, their pilots using every trick they had learned from video games, flight simulators, and sheer human instinct. The point defense systems, designed to track and destroy large missiles and enemy ships, couldn't lock onto targets so small and agile. The human pilots exploited every blind spot, every gap in the alien formation, every moment of confusion. And then Commander Park found what she was looking for. Base, I've located what looks like a docking bay. The hull is retracting to allow smaller craft inside. Park, do not attempt boarding. Your mission is reconnaissance only. But Lisa Park was the daughter of a Marine and the granddaughter of a fighter pilot. When she saw an opportunity to hurt humanity's enemies, orders became suggestions. Sorry, Base, sometimes you have to improvise. She accelerated her modified freight hauler straight toward the opening in the alien hull. Aboard the cruiser Golden Serenity, Subcommander was experiencing something no member of his species had felt in: panic. His ship's sensors were being jammed by the electromagnetic aftereffects of the primitive nuclear weapons. Smaller craft were swarming around his hull like insects. And now, his defensive officers were reporting that something had actually penetrated their hangar bay. How is that possible? He demanded. Our shields should have prevented any intrusion. Sir, the object was too small to trigger our defensive protocols. It appears to be a single pilot craft that somehow matched our docking sequence. Its perfect features contorted in rage. These primitives dare to board a vessel of the Empire? Send a security team to capture the intruder. I want to see what manner of creature has such audacity. What his security team found was Commander Lisa Park, armed with human weapons and a complete lack of respect for alien superiority. The soldiers were tall, graceful, and confident in their advanced technology. They carried energy weapons that could disintegrate matter at the molecular level and wore armor that could deflect most forms of attack. They were perfect warriors of a perfect species. Lisa Park was 5 feet 6 inches of concentrated human stubbornness, armed with an assault rifle, grenades, and the kind of fury that only came from watching aliens threaten her home. The firefight that erupted in the corridors of the Golden Serenity was brief and educational. They learned that human military doctrine was less about elegance and more about overwhelming violence applied with surgical precision. Lisa's bullets couldn't penetrate their energy shields, so she used explosives to bring down the corridor ceiling on top of them. When their weapons proved superior to hers, she improvised booby traps using the ship's own systems against its crew. More importantly, every moment she spent fighting in their ship, her suit's recording equipment was capturing detailed information about technology, ship design, and tactical responses. Base, this is Park. I'm uploading everything I can scan. These aliens are tough, but they fight like they've never faced real resistance. They're not adapting to guerrilla tactics. Park, get out of there now. Their entire fleet is converging on your position. Lisa looked around the alien corridor, noting the strange beauty of their architecture and the obvious sophistication of their technology. Then she thought about Earth, about humanity's children and families, and the simple right to exist without alien overlords. Negative, Base, I'm not done here yet. She began moving deeper into the ship, following signs and symbols toward what her equipment indicated was the vessel's central computer core. If she could access their systems, upload a virus, or just cause enough damage to cripple one of their ships, it would prove that humanity could hurt them. They were learning their first lesson about human warfare. When a human soldier gets aboard your ship is no longer yours. High Admiral watched his tactical display with growing disbelief as reports flooded in from across his fleet. The Golden Serenity was reporting internal intrusion and requesting assistance. 17 other ships had suffered similar boarding actions. The humans' nuclear barrage had damaged sensor arrays on 43 vessels, and somehow, impossibly, his fleet was being outmaneuvered by primitive spacecraft that should have been destroyed instantly. "How many ships have we lost?" he demanded. "None destroyed, High Admiral, but the Bright Eternity reports massive internal damage from some kind of explosive device planted by boarders. The Silver Dawn has lost main power after intruders sabotaged their energy distribution center. And sir," paused, her melodic voice faltering. "Continue." "Sir, the humans aren't fighting like any species we've encountered. They're not trying to defeat us in conventional battle. They're learning from us. Every attack is more sophisticated than the last." Studied the display showing the small human craft weaving between his ships. The primitive vessels were definitely outclassed by technology, but their pilots were flying with a skill and creativity that bordered on the impossible. They were using his own ship's blind spots against them, exploiting weaknesses in formation that no previous enemy had even noticed. "Recall all boarding parties," he commanded. "Implement close-range defensive protocols, and prepare to advance on their home world. It's time to end this embarrassment." But even as he gave the orders, couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. The humans weren't fighting like desperate primitives making a last stand. They were fighting like they had a plan. He was right. In the combined command center beneath Geneva, Dr. James Wu watched the real-time feeds from the battle with grim satisfaction. Phase 1 had been the asteroid bombardment, a distraction. Phase 2 had been the nuclear barrage, disruption, and sensor jamming. Phase 3 had been the boarding actions, intelligence gathering. Now it was time for Phase 4. All observation posts report status. Around the world, voices checked in from hidden facilities that had been monitoring every aspect of the alien fleet for the past 6 hours. Humanity's greatest scientists, military tacticians, and engineers had been studying their enemies with the focused intensity that had allowed them to split atoms and reach for the stars. "Geneva, this is Arecibo. We've identified their primary communication frequency." "Geneva, this is Kia. Spectral analysis confirms their ship's power source is some form of controlled spacetime manipulation." "Geneva, this is Cambridge. Mathematical analysis of their movement patterns suggests they rely heavily on automated tactical responses." Dr. Wu nodded as each piece of intelligence came in. The aliens were more advanced than humanity, but they weren't invincible. More importantly, they were making the classic mistake of underestimating their opposition. "Implementation Phase 4, he announced. "All units, this is what we've been working toward." Around the world, humanity's secret weapon came online. The aliens thought they were facing a primitive species with crude weapons and desperate tactics. What they were actually facing was a civilization that had spent 5 days studying every aspect of their technology, tactics, and behavior. Human intelligence agencies, military organizations, and scientific institutions had combined their efforts in an unprecedented analysis of their enemies. And now they were going to use that knowledge. Cyber Division, initiate electronic warfare protocols. Physics Division, activate the gravity pulse generators. Engineering Division, deploy the surprise packages. High Admiral was studying a tactical update when every system on his ship suddenly malfunctioned simultaneously. Warning lights flashed, the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, and his communication arrays began broadcasting what sounded like human music at maximum volume. "What is happening?" he shouted over the chaos. Science officer was frantically working her controls, but nothing was responding properly. "Sir, we appear to be experiencing some kind of system-wide malfunction. All of our computer networks are being flooded with alien code." What she didn't know was that Commander Lisa Park and the other boarding parties had done more than just gather intelligence. They had planted humanity's most advanced computer viruses directly into the ship's central systems. The viruses had spent hours analyzing alien computer languages and protocols before activating simultaneously across the entire fleet. The humans had hacked their way into the most advanced fleet in the galaxy, using nothing but stubborn ingenuity. and the kind of creative thinking that came from a species that had learned to survive by outsmarting bigger, stronger predators. But the cyber attack was just the beginning. As the ships struggled with their compromised systems, hidden installations on Earth's moon, and in the asteroid belt activated gravity manipulation devices reverse-engineered from preliminary scans of the alien ships. The devices were crude compared to technology, but they didn't need to be sophisticated. They just needed to create enough gravitational distortion to disrupt the aliens' perfect formations. Across the battlefield, space itself began to twist and buckle as humanity turned the aliens' own advanced physics against them. And then came the surprise packages. Commander Park smiled grimly as she watched security teams finally corner her in the ship's central computer core. She had accomplished her mission. The virus was uploaded, intelligence was gathered, and now it was time for the final phase of her personal contribution to humanity's defense. "You have caused enough damage, primitive creature," announced the lead soldier in perfect English. "Surrender and your death will be swift." Lisa looked at the beautiful, arrogant being threatening her, thought about every human child who deserved to grow up free, and pulled the pin on the thermonuclear device she had been carrying since her mission began. "Message from Earth," she said with a grin. "We don't surrender." The explosion that followed wasn't large by the standards of the battle raging outside, but it was precisely placed to cause maximum damage to the ship's critical systems. The Golden Serenity went dark, its perfect hull cracked and venting atmosphere. It was the first ship to be crippled in 3,000 years of conquest. High Admiral felt his perfect world crumbling around him as reports flooded in from across his fleet. The humans had somehow infiltrated his ships, corrupted his computers, disrupted his formations, and actually damaged several vessels. The primitive species that should have surrendered at first sight of his armada was systematically dismantling the pride of the Empire. For the first time in his long life, he began to understand what his victims had felt when his golden ships appeared in their skies. He was learning what it meant to be prey. But humanity was far from finished. The battle above Earth was just the beginning of a lesson in humility that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to be truly advanced. The thought they were gods, they were about to discover they were wrong. The message that changed everything arrived 6 hours into the battle, transmitted on a frequency no human had ever used before. High Admiral stood on the damaged bridge of the Eternal Dominion, watching his perfect fleet struggle against an enemy that refused to die gracefully. Half his ships were dealing with computer viruses, gravitational distortions, or internal sabotage. The humans were somehow coordinating attacks across millions of kilometers of space with precision that rivaled his own tactical systems. Then his communication officer announced something impossible. "High Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the human. They're broadcasting on our primary command frequency." "That's impossible," Captain protested. "That frequency is encrypted with quantum algorithms. These primitives couldn't possibly." "Display the message," interrupted. He was learning not to underestimate human impossibility. The flickered to life, showing a simple conference room on Earth. Around a wooden table sat representatives from every major nation, their faces calm despite the battle raging in space above their heads. At the center sat an elderly woman with gray hair and the steady gaze of someone who had spent a lifetime making difficult decisions. "I am Dr. Secretary General of the United Nations and speaking on behalf of the people of Earth. We wish to discuss terms." Felt a surge of relief. Finally, these stubborn creatures were ready to surrender. It had taken longer than any previous conquest, but the result would be the same. "You offer surrender," he replied through the communication array. The human woman smiled slightly. "No, we offer you the chance to surrender." The bridge of the Eternal Dominion fell silent. In 3 of conquest, no species had ever made such a statement to a fleet. It was so absurd that wondered if the translation systems were malfunctioning. "You mistake your position," he said, his musical voice carrying a note of warning. "Your planet is defenseless, your fleet is scattered, your technology is inferior, you cannot possibly—" "Admiral," Doctor interrupted, using his name and rank with casual accuracy that made ice form in his stomach. "May I call you Admiral? We've learned quite a bit about you and your empire in the past few hours. Your real name is, born on the 3rd moon of Prime approximately 3,200 years ago. You've commanded fleets in the conquest of 47 star systems. Your favorite recreation is composing mathematical symphonies. Your greatest fear is being considered imperfect by your peers. The Admiral stared at the screen in shock. The information was accurate down to details that were classified at the highest levels of society. How could you possibly know? The same way we know about science officers' secret poetry, captain's collection of crystalline art from conquered worlds, and the fact that your fleet carries exactly 12,437 crew members. Doctor's expression remained pleasant and conversational. We know because your people told us. On cue, the split to show additional feeds. Gasped as he recognized the faces, captured soldiers from the ships that had been boarded and sabotaged. They were sitting in what appeared to be comfortable rooms, speaking freely with human interrogators. Don't worry, Doctor continued. They haven't been harmed or coerced. We simply asked them questions and they answered. Your people are remarkably forthcoming when they're not feeling superior to their questioners. Sub-Commander from the Golden Serenity appeared on one of the feeds, looking relaxed and almost friendly as he discussed military doctrine with a human officer. The thing you have to understand, he was saying, is that we've never encountered real resistance before. Our tactical training focuses entirely on overwhelming inferior opponents quickly. Fascinating, replied the human interrogator. So your people have no experience with prolonged conflict or adaptive enemies? None whatsoever. Why would we need such training? Every species we've encountered has either surrendered immediately or been crushed within hours. Felt his perfect worldview cracking like thin ice. The humans had captured his people, learned their secrets, and were somehow using that information to what exactly? Doctor seemed to read his thoughts. You're wondering what our endgame is, aren't you, Admiral? Let me explain. For the past several hours, while you've been trying to understand how we've hurt your fleet, we've been learning everything we can about your empire. The main screen returned to showing the conference room, but now additional humans had joined the meeting. Recognized the uniforms and bearing of military officers, scientists, and what appeared to be intelligence analysts. This is General Harrison, our senior military strategist. Doctor, our expert on your technology. Professor Williams, who has been analyzing your cultural patterns. And this, she gestured to a young man with intense eyes, is David, who has spent the last 6 hours learning to speak your language fluently. The young man stood and spoke in perfect, his pronunciation flawless despite having learned the language in mere hours. Greetings, High Admiral. Your linguistic structure is quite elegant. We've enjoyed studying it. Captain whispered something in his ear about the impossibility of learning so quickly. But the Admiral was beginning to understand that human impossibility was becoming depressingly possible. What do you want? He asked. Doctor folded her hands on the table. We want you to leave our solar system and never return. We want you to send a message to your empire stating that Earth is under the protection of humanity and is not to be disturbed. And we want you to reconsider your approach to galactic diplomacy. And if we refuse, then we continue the current battle until one of us is destroyed. But Admiral, I think you should consider the mathematics of the situation. General Harrison stood, activating a holographic display that showed the current tactical situation. In the past 6 hours, your fleet has suffered the following: 43 ships with compromised computer systems, 17 ships with internal sabotage damage, 12 ships with structural damage from gravity distortions, and 1 ship completely disabled. You've lost approximately 8% of your combat effectiveness. In the same period, Doctor added, humanity has lost 32 small craft and their crews. However, our industrial capacity has increased by 40% as our entire civilization has mobilized for war production. At current rates of attrition, your fleet will be combat ineffective in approximately 18 hours. Professor Williams stepped forward. But the real question, Admiral, is what happens next. You see, we've been analyzing the information provided by your captured personnel, and we've learned something very interesting about your empire. The display shifted to show a map of space, with trade routes, communication lines, and fleet positions marked in detail. Your empire controls 17 star systems, but your actual military strength is concentrated in just 3 main fleets. This fleet represents approximately 30% of your total combat capability. If we destroy it, your empire becomes significantly vulnerable to the species you've been oppressing. felt cold realization settling in his stomach. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't we? Doctor's smile was sharp as a blade. Admiral, in the past 6 hours, humanity has demonstrated the ability to hack your computers, disable your ships, capture your personnel, and force your fleet into a defensive posture. What makes you think we couldn't take this battle to your home systems? The young linguist, David, spoke again in flowing. We've also been in communication with several of the species your empire has conquered. It turns out many of them have been waiting for an opportunity to rebel. They just needed to see that the mighty fleet could be defeated. On the display, new contacts appeared at the edge of the solar system. Ships of unfamiliar design but clearly advanced construction were dropping out of hyperspace. The vessels bore the markings of 3 different civilizations, all former conquests. The rebellion began 2 hours ago, General Harrison reported matter-of-factly. The uprising started 90 minutes ago. The Daleth resistance activated their hidden fleets 30 minutes ago. It seems news of your difficulties has spread faster than your ability to contain it. Admiral watched his tactical display with growing horror as red warning icons appeared throughout space. Rebellions were erupting on worlds that had been for centuries. Hidden resistance movements were revealing themselves across the Empire. And at the center of it all was the impossible realization that one primitive world had somehow coordinated a galaxy-spanning uprising. How, he whispered. Professor Williams smiled. The same way we coordinated our defense, Admiral. Communication, cooperation, and the willingness to help others resist tyranny. You see, you made one critical error in your assessment of humanity. Which was? You assumed we would only care about our own survival. You never considered that we might care about justice. Doctor stood, her expression serious but not unkind. Admiral, your empire is ending. It might end today with the destruction of this fleet and the collapse of your authority. Or it might end tomorrow when the rebellions you're facing spread to every world you've conquered. Or it might end next year when humanity builds ships capable of reaching your home systems. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. Or it might evolve into something better, starting right now. What are you proposing? A new paradigm? Your people are advanced, cultured, and clearly capable of great achievements. But your superiority complex has made you blind to the value of other species. You could be teachers, guides, partners in galactic civilization. Instead, you chose to be conquerors. Doctor stepped forward. We're offering you the chance to be part of something better, a galactic community based on cooperation rather than domination. Your technology combined with human adaptability, engineering, artistry, and Daleth philosophy could create wonders beyond anything any single species could achieve alone. And if we refuse? The conference room fell silent for a moment. Then Doctor spoke with the quiet certainty of someone stating a natural law. Then humanity will ensure that your empire ends, and something better rises from its ashes. We've learned enough about your technology to begin building our own star-traveling fleets. We've established contact with every species you've oppressed, and we've proven that the mighty empire can be defeated by determination, ingenuity, and the refusal to accept defeat. She leaned forward slightly. Admiral, your choice is not between victory and defeat. That was decided the moment you underestimated humanity's will to fight. Your choice is between evolution and extinction. For long moments, the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was silent, except for the hum of damaged systems and the distant sounds of ongoing repairs. High Admiral stared at the human woman on his screen, feeling the weight of 3 of absolute certainty crumbling around him. Everything he had believed about superiority, about the natural order of the galaxy, about the right of the strong to rule the weak, was dissolving before his eyes. These humans, these impossible, stubborn, brilliant humans, had not only resisted his fleet but had somehow turned his empire's greatest strength into its fatal weakness. For 3,000 years, they had ruled through fear and superiority. They had never had to consider what would happen if someone refused to be afraid, refused to accept their inferiority, and refused to surrender. Now that someone had appeared, and the galaxy would never be the same. Science officer, he said quietly. Yes, High Admiral. Our tactical analysis. What are our chances of victory if we continue this battle? Consulted her instruments, her musical voice subdued. With current fleet damage and the arrival of enemy reinforcements. Less than 20%, sir. and that assumes no further human surprises. Captain, sir, your assessment of human tactical capabilities was silent for a long moment. Sir, they fight like no species we've ever encountered. They adapt in real time, coordinate across impossible distances, and seem to consider defeat simply another problem to solve. They're actually quite remarkable. Turned back to where Doctor waited patiently for his response. Around her, the other humans showed no signs of impatience or anxiety. They had stated their position and would wait for his decision with the calm confidence of people who knew they held the stronger hand. Doctor, he said finally. Yes, Admiral. You mentioned evolution. What exactly are you proposing? The elderly woman smiled, and for the first time it was warm rather than sharp. We're proposing that you do what humanity has always done when faced with a superior force: adapt, learn, and become something better. General Harrison activated the holographic display again, this time showing a very different image. Instead of battle plans and tactical positions, it showed star charts marked with trade routes, communication networks, and collaborative research stations. Imagine, Doctor continued, a galaxy where your people's advanced technology is used to heal rather than conquer, where engineering builds ships for exploration rather than war, where artists share their beauty across the stars, where Daleth philosophers help solve the great questions of existence, where human adaptability helps everyone face the challenges of an infinite universe. Professor Williams stepped forward. Your empire spans 17 star systems, Admiral, but humanity has already identified over 3,000 potentially habitable worlds within reach of our expanding technology. The galaxy is vast enough for all of us to thrive without anyone needing to kneel. And if some choose not to join this community, then they're free to go their own way, as long as they don't try to force their choices on others, Doctor replied. The universe is big enough for different approaches to civilization. What it's not big enough for is any single species deciding they have the right to rule all others. David spoke again, his accent now indistinguishable from a native speaker. Your people have spent 3 proving that you can conquer. Perhaps it's time to prove that you can create. Admiral looked around his damaged bridge, at his officers who were struggling with concepts they had never had to consider, at tactical displays showing an empire in rebellion, and a fleet that was learning what it meant to lose. Then he looked at the humans on his screen, these impossible creatures who had turned his perfect conquest into a lesson in humility, who had united enemies across the galaxy, who had proven that determination and ingenuity could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. Doctor, he said slowly, if I were to order my fleet to withdraw and accept your proposal, what guarantee do we have that humanity won't simply become the next empire to dominate the galaxy? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Doctor considered it seriously before responding. None, she said simply. You have no guarantee except our word and our history. But Admiral, look what humanity has accomplished in just hours when faced with extinction. We unified our entire species, coordinated with former enemies, developed new technologies, and turned your own superiority against you. If we wanted to build an empire, don't you think we would have started conquering Earth's nations long ago instead of learning to work together? She stood again, her bearing dignified despite the modest surroundings. The difference between humanity and the Empire, Admiral, is that when we encountered a superior force, we didn't assume we deserved to be conquered. And when we developed the capability to fight back, we didn't assume we deserved to be conquerors. Instead, General Harrison added, we assumed everyone deserved to be free. The bridge fell silent again as contemplated the decision that would define not just his life, but the future of galactic civilization. Around him, his officers waited for orders that would echo across the stars for generations to come. Finally, he spoke. Communications officer. Yes, High Admiral. Open a channel to all ships in the fleet. Priority Alpha. Channel open, sir. Straightened his perfect posture and looked directly into the camera that would carry his words to 1,200 vessels and their thousands of crew members. Attention all ships. This is High Admiral with fleet-wide orders. Effective immediately, all offensive operations against the Sol system are suspended. All ships will stand down from combat alert and assume defensive positions. All boarding parties are to be withdrawn immediately. He paused, feeling the weight of history in his next words. For 3, the Empire has expanded across the stars, believing that our advancement gave us the right to rule lesser species. Today, we have learned that advancement is not measured by the ability to conquer, but by the wisdom to know when conquest is wrong. On the doctor nodded with quiet approval. The humans of Sol have demonstrated something we had forgotten in our certainty of superiority, that any species, no matter how advanced or primitive, deserves the right to determine its own destiny. They have also demonstrated that cooperation can achieve what domination never could. His voice carried to every corner of the fleet, to officers who had never questioned their empire's righteousness, to crews who had believed themselves the galaxy's rightful masters. Therefore, I am formally requesting new orders from the High Council. I recommend that we begin negotiations for a new form of galactic governance, one based on mutual cooperation rather than imperial domination. And I recommend that we start by learning from the species we once sought to conquer. He looked directly at Doctor. Doctor, on behalf of the Empire, I formally request to begin discussions regarding your proposed galactic community. We have much to learn from humanity about what it means to be truly civilized. The elderly human woman smiled, and this time it lit up her entire face. Admiral, on behalf of humanity and our new allies, I accept your request. Welcome to the future. 6 months later, the first Galactic Cooperation Council convened on a neutral space station constructed jointly by human and Daleth engineers. The station itself was a marvel, combining energy manipulation, human adaptability, structural engineering, artistic vision, and Daleth philosophical harmony into something that no single species could have created alone. Doctor, now the first Director General of the Galactic Cooperation Council, stood before representatives of 17 different species in the council chamber. The room itself embodied the new galactic paradigm, built for cooperation rather than domination, designed for discussion rather than decree. 6 months ago, she began, humanity faced the choice between slavery and extinction. Today, we gather as equals to build something that has never existed before, a truly cooperative galactic civilization. In the audience, Admiral sat beside human General Harrison, both of them working together on joint military exercises designed not for conquest, but for defending smaller species from the few remaining aggressive empires in the galaxy. They had learned to appreciate human tactical thinking, while the human had gained invaluable insight into advanced fleet coordination. The old way of thinking saw the galaxy as a hierarchy, Doctor continued, with advanced species at the top and primitive ones at the bottom. But we've learned that advancement is not about superiority, it's about capability to contribute to the greater good. She gestured to the diverse assembly before her. Today, technology helps terraforming projects that will provide homes for billions. Human adaptability enables rapid response to galactic emergencies. Engineering builds the infrastructure of peace. Art inspires cooperation across cultural boundaries. Daleth philosophy guides our decisions toward wisdom rather than expedience. The Director General paused, looking out at faces, human and alien, that represented the first truly cooperative galactic government in known history. The Empire lasted 3,000 years because it was built on the principle that might makes right. This council will last far longer because it's built on the principle that cooperation makes everyone stronger. As applause filled the chamber, musical harmonies mixing with human cheers and the various expressions of approval from a dozen other species, Doctor reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Humanity had faced extinction and chosen to fight. In fighting, they had discovered not just their own strength, but the strength that came from refusing to stand alone. They had shattered the pride of an empire not through superior force, but through superior ideals. They had thought themselves gods among primitive mortals. Instead, they had learned that true divinity lay not in domination, but in the wisdom to help others reach their full potential. The galaxy stretched out before them, vast and full of wonders waiting to be discovered by species working together rather than apart. There would be challenges, conflicts, and moments when the old ways of thinking would reassert themselves. But they had proven something that would echo across the stars for generations to come. When faced with the choice between submission and cooperation, between conquest and community, between the easy path of domination and the hard path of equality, The best of any species would choose to reach for something better. The age of empire was ending. The age of cooperation had begun. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that humanity had taught the galaxy. Sometimes the greatest victory is not in proving your superiority, but in helping others discover their own strength. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, as if the universe itself approved of this new chapter in galactic civilization. A chapter where no single species would ever again mistake themselves for gods, because they had learned something far more valuable: how to be good neighbors among the infinite wonders of the cosmos.